My name is Renata Voss. I was 34 years old and 18 months into rebuilding my life after a divorce when my brother Caleb died, and the first thing my parents did after they got the call was schedule the estate sale. Not the funeral. The sale. I was a paralegal at Drummond and Fitch in Spokane, 8 years reading contracts, organizing discovery files, learning how paperwork moves and what it means when someone is in a hurry to move it. I knew what urgency around assets usually signaled. I just never thought I'd need that knowledge for my own family. Caleb was 31. He had a truck he loved, a woodworking shop in the back of the rented garage on Mercer Line Road in Gillette County, and a cardboard box on his closet shelf that he'd asked me to keep an eye on the last time I visited. He didn't explain what was in it. He just said, "If anything ever happens, Ren, that box is yours." I told him nothing was going to happen. He smiled like he already knew I was wrong. He died on a Tuesday. A blood clot. Fast, no warning. He was at work at Halverson Sheet Metal when it hit him, and he was gone before the ambulance reached the county road. I was at my desk in Spokane when my mother called. I didn't cry right away. My throat closed like a fist around something I couldn't name, and I sat very still for a long time after I hung up, my hand still on the phone. I booked a flight for Thursday morning. It was the earliest I could arrange. I had files to transfer, a coverage plan to set up with my supervisor, a cat to board. I called my mother back and told her I'd be there Thursday afternoon. She said, "That's fine, honey. We'll handle things until you get here." I didn't know what things meant. I should have asked. Welcome back to channel_name, where we talk about the moments that quietly divide your life into before and after, and what you do when the people who are supposed to hold you together are the ones holding the door open for strangers to walk through your brother's life while you are still 30,000 feet in the air. If you're new here, please subscribe. We tell these stories slowly, the way they actually happened. That box on Caleb's shelf, the one he told me was mine, I want you to keep it in the back of your mind as I tell you this story. Because everything that happened over the next 2 years moved toward that box, even when I didn't know it yet. I grew up in Dunfield, a small city in the eastern part of the state where the winters come hard and the families tend to run close and tight, which can mean warmth and it can mean suffocation, and in our family it mostly meant the second thing with just enough of the first scattered in to keep you confused about which one you were feeling. My father, Gerald Voss, managed the receiving dock at a distribution warehouse for 22 years. My mother, Diane, kept the house and ran the finances and made every significant decision while presenting it as something my father had decided. They were good at appearances. Church on Sundays, lawn edged on Saturdays, Christmas cards mailed by the 1st of December, without fail. From the outside, we looked like a family that had everything organized. What they had organized mostly was their preference for Caleb. I don't say that with an edge in my voice anymore. I spent years with my jaw tight whenever the subject came up, and then I spent more years understanding it, and now I can just say it plainly. Caleb was the golden child. He was warm and funny and easy to love, and my parents had built their identity as parents around him in a way they never quite managed with me. I was capable, they said. I was fine. Caleb needed them. That was the structural logic underneath everything. Caleb needed warmth, and I had always seemed like I didn't. What that meant in practice was that when things went wrong in my life, my parents were sympathetic in a brief and surface way before the conversation turned back to Caleb. When my marriage ended, my mother called to say she was sorry, and then spent 40 minutes of that same call telling me about Caleb's new girlfriend and how good she was for him. I didn't argue. I understood the architecture of our family by then. On the third shelf of my own closet in Spokane, I kept a coffee mug Caleb had given me years earlier, a thick ceramic one, chipped on the handle from when I dropped it moving into my apartment and glued it back together because I couldn't make myself throw it away. Every morning I filled it before I sat down to work, and I held it with both hands while the coffee cooled, and I thought about him. That is the thing about grief objects. They are never just the object. They are the whole person compressed into something you can hold. The night before my flight, I packed a bag, and I called Caleb's phone just to hear his voicemail greeting. "You've reached Caleb. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you when I get back to you." I set the phone down on my kitchen counter and stood there until the refrigerator humming was the only sound in the apartment. I boarded my flight Thursday morning at 7:40. I landed in Gillette County Regional at noon, rented a car from the small desk in the corner of the terminal where a teenager named Marcus had clearly just started his first week on the job, and I drove south on Route 9 toward Dunfield. I called my mother from the car. "Are you close?" she asked. "About 40 minutes out," I said. "How are you holding up?" There was a small pause. "We've been busy," she said. There was a lot to manage. "Like what?" I asked. "What's needed right now?" "Oh, you know," she said. "The house. His things." There was more than we expected. I assumed she meant arrangements. Death involved arrangements, the funeral home, the death certificates, the notifications. I'd been a paralegal long enough to know the paperwork that follows a person's death, and I assumed my parents had been working through it. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house on Caldwell Street, and I knew before I got out of the car that something was wrong. There was a folding table still set up at the end of Caleb's driveway 2 houses down. He had rented the house on the corner from a family friend, and the table had that particular stripped-bare look of something that had recently held a great number of objects and now held none. My mother came out of the house and met me on the front walk. "We got a good turnout," she said. I looked at the table. I looked at her. "Mom," I said. "What did you do?" She explained it with the same reasonable tone she used to explain everything: the groceries, the utility bills, rescheduling dentist appointments. They had organized an estate sale. Wednesday and Thursday. It was better to handle it quickly, she said, before the landlord started asking about the contents. They'd made $9,400 and change. She said it like a number that should comfort me. I stood on the front walk of my parents' house, and the afternoon light felt sharp and wrong, the way light looks when your body knows something your mind is still catching up to. His tools, I said. Sold. His books. Most of them. Some didn't sell. The woodworking shop. The equipment went to a man from Harker Township. He paid well. "When did you decide this?" I asked. "When did you decide to do this before I got here?" She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when a question was inconvenient. "We couldn't leave the house sitting open, Renata. The landlord was asking. We did what made sense." "I could have been here by Tuesday," I said. "If I'd known, I could have rearranged." "It was already handled by Tuesday," she said, in the patient tone that ended conversations. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. My hands were at my sides, and I pressed my thumbnail into the pad of my index finger, a slow, steady pressure, something to anchor me to the physical world while the other world, the one where Caleb's things still existed, collapsed quietly behind my eyes. "The box," I said. "On his closet shelf. Cardboard about this big." My mother looked at me. "I don't know about a box," she said. The next morning I drove to Caleb's rental house on Mercer Line Road and knocked on the door until the landlord's wife, a woman named Beverly Cruz, came to the door in a bathrobe and told me my parents had already returned the key. I asked if I could look through what remained. Beverly Cruz was a decent woman. She let me in. What remained was very little. 3 wire hangers in the closet. A tube of wood glue on the floor of the garage. A coffee can full of wood screws. The shelf where Caleb had kept the box was bare. I sat down on the floor of his empty garage, and I stayed there for a while. Then I got up because sitting on floors only helps for so long, and I started working. For 6 weeks after Caleb's funeral, I called every person who had attended the estate sale that I could trace through the neighborhood Facebook group where my mother had advertised it, identifying items and asking who had purchased what. I kept a list in a spiral notebook, each name in one column and what they had purchased in another, and I cross-referenced it with the photographs Caleb had sent me over the years, his workbench, his tools laid out, his bookshelves. It was painstaking, and I did it at my kitchen table in Spokane after work each night, the notebook open beside Caleb's chipped mug, until I had accounted for nearly 40 items. For 3 months through the fall following his death, I drove to the shops and secondhand stores in Gillette County and the 2 counties adjacent, showing a photograph of Caleb's toolboxes to owners and floor managers, cataloging what I could verify had left that house. I did this on Saturday mornings, leaving Spokane before 6, so I could reach the county by the time the shops opened. Beverly Cruz had given me a cup of coffee the second time I knocked on her door with questions, and she let me walk through the garage again with a flashlight. She didn't ask why. For 4 months beginning in January, I submitted formal requests to the county probate office in Dunfield, learning the specific requirements that applied to personal property distribution when no formal will had been filed. Work I did every Saturday morning at the public library on Fenwick Avenue, because the library had a printer and I did not. For 5 months across that first year, I built a documented record of every item I could identify that had left Caleb's property, cross-referenced against the $9,400 my parents had collected, using the skills I applied every workday at Drummond and Fitch to organize evidence for other people's cases. For 2 weeks in February, I consulted with an estate attorney named Patricia Hale at a solo practice on the second floor of the Meridian Building in downtown Dunfield, paying her $340 per hour from my savings to understand exactly what my legal standing was and what it wasn't. She was direct with me in the first appointment. She said, "You're building something here, but you need the documents to carry the weight.
Tell me what documents you have."
I spread my notebook and my printed probate pages on her desk. She read through them without comment, the way people who process information for a living read, steadily, eyes moving, nothing on their face. When she was finished, she looked up. "You've done solid work," she said. "The gap is the declarations. Without a formal instrument, what you have is evidence of intent, but not enforcement." "What would make it enforceable?"
I asked.
"A properly executed declaration, notarized, with a capable witness." "Did your brother ever execute anything like that?" I thought about the box on the closet shelf. "I don't know yet," I said. "I'm looking for something."
"Find it," she said.
"If it exists and it's properly executed, your standing changes considerably." I drove back to Spokane that evening and I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at the box I had not yet opened, and I understood that the time for being careful was not yet over. For 3 months in the spring of the second year, I corresponded with Patricia Hale's office, building the paper trail she said we would need if I ever chose to act on what we'd found. Every Thursday evening I answered her assistant's emails at my kitchen table, the printed probate forms stacked in a manila folder that I kept on the third shelf of my closet, next to where the chipped mug sat on its hook. For 6 months of that second year, I maintained a spreadsheet that documented every asset of Caleb's I could identify, every dollar value I could establish, and every communication my parents had sent me in the months since his death, including the Venmo request for $312 in storage fees that arrived 11 days after the funeral, which I screenshotted and printed and added to the file. For 8 months, I said nothing to my parents about any of it. I answered their calls. I came for Thanksgiving. I passed the green bean casserole and listened to my father talk about the weather moving in from the north, and I didn't argue, and I didn't flinch, and I didn't give them any indication that I had spent the better part of a year becoming very, very prepared. For 11 months, I looked for the box. I found it on a Tuesday in March, 5:47 on a Tuesday morning, to be exact, because I couldn't sleep and I had started doing my searching in the early hours before work when the quiet helped me think. I found it through a listing on a regional online resale marketplace. Miscellaneous cardboard box, personal papers, miscellaneous contents, $8. The seller was a woman in Harker Township, the same township where my mother had said the man came from who bought Caleb's woodworking equipment. My hands were cold when I typed the message. The screen of my laptop was the only light in the apartment, and the refrigerator hummed, and I typed very carefully, "I'm interested in the box."
"I can come this week,"
she replied at 6:14 a.m. "It's yours if you want it." I drove to Harker Township on a Saturday. I paid $8 in cash. The woman who sold it to me was named Vera, and she was in her 70s and had a garage full of the overflow from a life lived without throwing much away. She handed me the box at the end of her driveway, and I thanked her, and she said she hoped whatever was in it was something good. I said I wasn't sure yet. She nodded like that was a reasonable answer. I put the box on the passenger seat and I drove home, and I did not open it in the car because I needed to be somewhere still when I saw what was inside. I set it on my kitchen table. I made coffee in Caleb's chipped mug and held it with both hands until it cooled. Then I left the box where it was. Because I wasn't ready yet. And because some things are worth waiting until you are. The Venmo request came on a Sunday. I was at my kitchen table with a second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed, and I looked down and saw my mother's name attached to a request for $312 with a note. Storage plus handling, Caleb's items, your share. I set the phone face down on the table. I picked up Caleb's mug and held it. I turned the phone back over and looked at the number again. $312. Not a round number. A calculated number, the kind you arrive at when you've actually sat down and worked something out. My mother had sat down and worked something out. I didn't respond that day. I needed to understand what I was looking at before I said anything because I had learned in 8 years of paralegal work that the first response to something unexpected is almost never the right one. You read it twice. You sit with it. You figure out what it's actually telling you. What it was telling me was that my parents had sold my brother's belongings, kept the money, and then billed me for the privilege of having had his things stored in a house he was renting and paying for himself until 4 days before they cleared it out. I called my mother the following Tuesday evening. "Did you get my Venmo?" she asked before I could say anything.
"I did," I said.
"Can you walk me through the calculation?" "It's straightforward," she said. "Your father and I spent 2 days managing everything at Caleb's place.
Gas, supplies, our time.
We split it 3 ways, us, you, and we set aside a share for the expenses. $312 is your portion." 3 ways, I said. "That's right. Mom, I was on a plane." "Honey, someone had to handle it." She said it with the particular warmth she reserved for statements she had already decided were closed. "You know how your father is about loose ends. We couldn't just leave everything sitting there." "The money from the sale," I said. "What happened to that?" A pause, just slightly longer than the others. "It went toward the costs. Managing the estate isn't free, Renata." "The sale brought in over $9,000, I said. "We'll talk about that when everything settles," she said, in the tone that meant we would not. "I'd appreciate it if you could send the $312 when you get a chance." I didn't argue. I said I'd think about it, and I got off the phone, and I wrote down everything she'd said, word for word, in the notebook I'd started keeping. I kept the notebook in my bag at all times after that. It was a standard spiral bound, the kind you find in drugstores for $1.50, and I filled the first 18 pages in the first 3 months, not with arguments or accusations, but with dates and exact words. The date they called about the savings account. What my mother said, word for word. What my father said. The pauses. The phrases she used that were the same as other phrases she had used, the rhythms of how she moved conversation away from questions she did not want to answer. I had spent 8 years transcribing depositions and reading through discovery, and I knew that the most important thing about a record is that it exists, that it is somewhere, that it has a date. The notebook filled. I started a second one. The first time I understood the full shape of what my parents had done, it wasn't the Venmo request. It was Thanksgiving. I drove down to Dunfield in November, for months after Caleb died, because I didn't know how not to yet. The house smelled like it always had. My mother's stuffing with too much sage, the particular dry heat of the floor registers, the faint cedar of the hall closet. My father was in his chair with the game on low. My mother was in the kitchen. Everything looked exactly the way it always had, and that wrongness sat in my chest like a stone. We ate. My father talked about the early snow. My mother talked about the neighbor's new roof. Nobody said Caleb's name for the first 40 minutes. I said it. "I've been thinking about his woodworking stuff," I said. "The projects he had going. There was a cabinet he was building for a client. Do you know if that was ever finished or returned?" My mother set down her fork. "Renata, I'm just asking. We're trying to have a nice meal." My father looked at the table. "I know," I said. "I'm not trying to make it hard. I just want to know what happened to his things." "We handled it," my mother said. "We handled everything while you were in Spokane, and I'd appreciate it if we could have one meal without you making us feel like we did something wrong." The table went quiet. I looked at my plate. The stuffing had too much sage, same as always, and I ate it without tasting it, and I didn't say another word about Caleb for the rest of the meal. My mother refilled my water glass with the same pleasant expression she wore when she was winning an argument she hadn't acknowledged having. That was the first silence. I let it sit there. After the meal, when my father had gone to the living room and my mother was putting food away, I stood in the kitchen doorway. "The Venmo," I said. "I've been thinking about it." My mother set a lid on a dish and didn't look up. "Honey, it's just the practical side of things." I understand what it says it is, I said. I want to understand what the 9,400 went toward. She opened the refrigerator. It covered costs. The estate takes work. What costs specifically? She set the dish inside. The refrigerator hummed when she closed the door. I'm not going to get into a line-by-line with you on Thanksgiving, Renata. That's not what today is for. Okay, I said. I picked up a dish towel. I dried a serving spoon and set it on the counter. My mother began stacking the leftover rolls. He would have wanted things to be practical, she said. You know that about him. He would have wanted me to understand what happened to his things, I said. She didn't answer that. She carried the rolls to the counter and covered them in plastic wrap, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing a household and preferred not to examine the work too closely. I set the dish towel over the oven handle and went to find my coat. The second time came in January, when my mother called to tell me they had decided to donate Caleb's remaining clothes to the church rummage sale. The ones that didn't sell? I asked. The church gets more use out of them than an empty closet does, she said. Mom, could you hold them? I'd like to go through them before. Renata, we've been storing them for months. It's not healthy to hold on to things. Caleb would have understood that. She said his name like a tool, like something she could use. I hear you, I said. Could you give me 2 weeks? The sale is Saturday. It was Wednesday. I stayed calm. I pressed the phone against my ear and listened to the background sounds of her kitchen, the faint sound of the radio she kept on when she was moving through the house. Could I come down this weekend? I said. Friday evening. I could look through them before the sale. The bags are already packed, she said. I could unpack a bag. Renata. Her voice had the patient softness she used when she was ending something. We need to move forward. All of us. That's what Caleb would have said too. He never said that to me, I said. A pause. Well, she said, he would have. I let that sit for a moment. The radio played something faintly in the background, and I heard her set something ceramic on the counter. All right, I said. I'll think about what you said. I did not send the Venmo payment. I drove down Thursday after work. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway at 11:08 at night and watched the lights go off in the front rooms one by one until the house was dark. Then I went inside with my key, and I went to the spare room where my mother had stacked the bags, and I went through every one of them in the dark with the flashlight on my phone. His flannel shirt, the green one he wore every Thanksgiving, the one that had a small burn mark on the left cuff from a campfire 3 summers ago, was in the third bag. I took it. I folded it and put it in my bag, and I drove back to Spokane in the dark, and I was home by 4 in the morning, and I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen until the light came up, Caleb's mug on the table in front of me, and I thought about the way my mother had said the church gets more use out of them than an empty closet does, and how that was almost certainly true, and how that was not the point, and how she would never understand that it was not the point. That was something I had been learning slowly, that my mother's reasonableness was not the same as being right. She was good at reasonable. She had always been good at reasonable. Reasonable was the thing she stood behind the way other people stood behind raised voices. It was quieter and it was harder to argue with, and it accomplished the same end. The third time came in March. My parents called together, my father on the extension, which they only did when they had agreed on something in advance. We wanted to talk to you about Caleb's savings, my mother said. My stomach tightened. What about them? He had an account at Dunfield Federal. Not much, a little under $6,000. We've been in contact with the bank, and since there's no named beneficiary, it goes through the estate. I know how it works, I said. We thought it would be simplest for us to manage the estate since we're local, my father said. It was one of the longest sentences he'd spoken to me in months. There are forms for that, I said. A letter's testamentary process through the probate court. Have you filed? A pause. We haven't gotten that far yet, my mother said. We wanted to let you know as a courtesy. As a courtesy. I wrote that down too. I appreciate that, I said. I'd like to be part of the process. Of course, my mother said, in the tone that meant of course not. I let the line go quiet for a moment. My father cleared his throat softly. Has Patricia, has anyone been named to handle the estate officially? I asked. We're looking into it, my mother said. All right, I said. Keep me posted. I hung up and wrote the date at the top of the page and underlined it. I called the Gillette County probate court the following morning. The clerk I reached was a woman named Sandra, who answered in the measured, deliberate way of someone accustomed to people calling in a state of controlled distress. She explained the letter's testamentary process to me in careful order. She told me that without a formal filing, no one had legal authority to transfer estate assets. She paused in the way people pause when they are not saying something they cannot say. If assets have already been moved, I said, before letters testamentary were filed, that would be a matter for the court to review, she said. If someone chose to raise it. I thanked her and wrote that down too. For 3 weeks in March, I prepared a formal summary of the asset transfers I had documented, organized by date and cross-referenced against the account statements I had obtained through the probate office's public records process. I did this at the library on Fenwick Avenue, where a woman named Claire at the reference desk had started recognizing me on Saturdays and always made sure the printer had paper before I arrived. I brought her coffee from the cart across the street twice. She never asked what I was working on. Some kindnesses are like that. The 4th time, and the hardest, was Easter Sunday. I drove down because my aunt was visiting from out of state, and I hadn't seen her in 2 years, and she had loved Caleb, and I thought at least she and I could sit together and say his name out loud without someone changing the subject. After dinner, my aunt went to lie down, long drive, she said, and I helped my mother with the dishes, and my father sat at the table with his decaf, and my mother said, while she was rinsing a serving bowl, "Your father and I have been talking about selling the house." I looked up. This house. We're not getting younger, she said. It's a lot to maintain. We thought if we downsized, there'd be something for you. An early inheritance, kind of. Help you get back on your feet after everything. The water ran between her hands and the bowl, and she didn't look at me. That's a big decision, I said. We've thought it through. What does downsizing look like, exactly? A condo, maybe. Something easier. We found a place in the Pinebrook development out on County Road 7. I dried a glass. I set it on the rack. And the sale of this house would net. What, roughly? My mother named a number. It was a reasonable number for the market in Dunfield, somewhere in the mid-200s. And my share would be, we thought, $50,000, once we cover the move and get settled. I set down the dish towel. $50,000 from a house sale that would net well over $200,000. After they had sold Caleb's belongings and kept $9,400. After the $312 Venmo request. After the savings account they were positioning to manage alone. The water was still running. My mother turned it off. That's generous, I said. She smiled. We want to take care of you. What's the timeline you're thinking? I asked. For listing. Summer, maybe. We'd want to get the place in order first. She began drying her hands. Your father wants to deal with the garage. The garage has a lot in it, I said. It does, she agreed. But it's manageable. Would there be anything from the garage? Any of Caleb's things he may have stored there? She paused for just a half step. I don't think so. He kept his things at his place, mostly. Right, I said. Of course. The kitchen was very still after that. The refrigerator cycled on. My father turned a page of something at the table. My mother began drying her hands on the other dish towel with the careful thoroughness of someone who has just said exactly what she meant to say. I smiled back at her. I understood something in that moment that I had been circling for months. The way you circle something in the dark before your eyes adjust, and you can finally see the shape of it. My parents had not done these things out of cruelty, exactly. They had done them out of the settled conviction that I was the capable one, the fine one, the one who didn't need. Caleb had needed them, and they had built their whole identity around providing for him, and when he died they didn't know what to do with all that providing instinct except turn it on the only remaining resource, which was whatever he'd left behind. They had liquidated his life the same way they had always managed things, efficiently, locally, with a sense of reasonable authority, and they had never once considered that any of it belonged to me because in their architecture of the family, things had always just gone to Caleb. Now that Caleb was gone, things would go to them. I was still the capable one, the fine one, The one who didn't need. The one who, they had decided without saying so, could receive $50,000 from a house sale and be grateful for it and ask no further questions. I smiled at my mother across the kitchen. "Let me know when you're ready to talk about the details," I said. She patted my arm. "We will, honey." My father called from the table. "Good coffee cake this year, Diane." My mother said thank you. I folded the dish towel over the oven handle and said I was going to check on my aunt, and I walked down the hall, and I pressed my back against the wall of the hallway where neither of them could see me, and I stood there in the dark for a full minute, my shoulder blades flat against the plaster, my breath very slow and very even. Then I went in to sit with my aunt, who talked about Caleb for an hour without once being asked to stop, and I held a throw pillow in my lap and pressed my fingers into it and listened, and that was the best hour I had spent in that house in a very long time. I drove back to Spokane on Easter Monday. I made an appointment with Patricia Hale for the following Thursday. I pulled the notebook from my bag and set it on the kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I found the estate filing requirements for Gillette County on the probate court's website. I printed 7 pages. I made coffee in Caleb's chipped mug. I sat down. I reached into the closet shelf, and I took down the cardboard box from Harker Township. I set it on the table next to the printed pages. I did not open it yet. I put my hands flat on the table on either side of it. I looked at it for a long time. I opened the box on a Thursday evening in April, 3 weeks after Easter, because Patricia Hale had called that afternoon and told me she had found something, and whatever she had found had shifted something in my chest that made me understand the time for waiting was over. I want to tell you what Patricia said on that call. But first I want to tell you what was in the box, because that is what everything had been moving toward since the day Caleb stood in his garage on Mercer Line Road and looked at me with that particular quiet in his eyes and said, "If anything ever happens, Ren, that box is yours." I sat at my kitchen table. The printed probate pages were stacked to my left. The notebook was open to a blank page. The coffee in Caleb's chipped mug had gone cold an hour ago, and I hadn't refilled it because I wanted my hands free. I reached into the box. The flaps were folded closed the way Caleb folded everything, practical, no tape, the kind of fold that holds without needing anything extra. My fingers found the edge of a manila envelope inside, thick, heavier than I expected. I took it out slowly. It had my name on the front in Caleb's handwriting, Renata, in the black marker he used for labeling his wood-stained cans, the letters large and even and careful. I unfolded the envelope's clasp slowly, the metal brad stiff from however long it had been sitting, and I pulled out the contents and laid them flat on the table in front of me. There were 3 things. The first was a handwritten letter, for pages, front and back, in Caleb's cramped left-handed script on yellow legal paper. The second was a document, typewritten, 2 pages, with a notary seal on the second page and a date in the upper right corner. September 14th, 3 years before he died. The third was a smaller envelope, sealed, with the words "for when you need proof" written on the front. I read the letter first. I won't tell you everything it said. Some of it belongs only to me and to Caleb, and I intend to keep it that way. But I will tell you this, he knew. He had known for a long time. He had watched our parents manage things, redirect things, position themselves between assets and the people those assets were meant to reach, and he had watched it with the clear eyes of someone who loved them and understood them and was not confused about what they were doing. He wrote about the summer our grandmother died and how the furniture from her house had been distributed in a single afternoon, with no one asking Caleb or me what we might have wanted to keep. He wrote about a watch of our grandfather's that he had been told was lost, and that he had later seen on the wrist of a cousin who had no particular relationship with the man. He wrote about the way our parents made decisions, quickly, efficiently, in the window before anyone else thought to ask, and the way they presented those decisions afterward as if they had been made with everyone's interests in mind. I had not known about the watch. I sat with that for a moment. "They mean well, Ren," he wrote, near the end of the 3rd page. "But meaning well is not the same as doing right. I need someone to do right." I set the letter down carefully. I looked at it on the table for a moment, Caleb's left-handed handwriting filling 4 pages front and back, the letters slanting slightly the way they always had. Then I picked up the typewritten document. The typewritten document was a personal property declaration. Caleb had executed it with a notary, a woman named Gail Fossum at a UPS store on Addison Street in downtown Dunfield, 3 years before his death. In it, he named me, Renata Claire Voss, as the sole designated recipient of all personal property in his possession at the time of his death, including tools, furniture, books, equipment, and any financial accounts held in his name without a named beneficiary. It was not a will. Patricia Hale had been careful to explain the distinction to me over months of Thursday appointments. A personal property declaration of this type had specific enforceability parameters. What it was, she had told me, was evidence. Clear, notarized, dated evidence of Caleb's intent. And what she had found that afternoon, the thing that had made her call me, was that Dunfield Federal had a provision in their account agreement that gave weight to documented declarations of intent in the absence of a formal beneficiary designation. The $6,000 in Caleb's savings account, which my parents had quietly transferred to themselves 4 months ago through the informal estate management process they had initiated without filing proper letters testamentary, had been transferred in direct conflict with the document that established my claim. Patricia had filed a formal objection with the Gillette County probate court that morning. I sat with all of this for a long time. Then I called my mother. "Renata," she said. "This is a surprise." "I'm coming down this weekend," I said. "I'd like to sit down with you and Dad. There are some things I want to go over." A small pause. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said. "I just want to talk." She said Sunday would work. I said Sunday was fine. I hung up and I looked at the papers laid flat on my table, and I thought about Caleb writing "I need someone to do right" in his left-handed script on yellow legal paper, and I pressed my thumbnail into my index finger once, a slow, steady pressure, and then I got up and I went to bed. I drove to Dunfield on Sunday morning. My parents were at the kitchen table when I arrived, my father with his decaf, my mother with her tea, the Sunday paper divided between them. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the lavender dish soap my mother had used as long as I could remember. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. I sat down across from them. I had the manila envelope in my bag. "Coffee?" my mother asked. "I'm fine," I said. She looked at me for a moment, something shifting behind her eyes, and then she folded the paper and set it aside. "You said you wanted to talk," she said. "I do," I said. "I want to talk about what happened after Caleb died." My father set down his cup. "We've been over this," my mother said. "We handled everything the best we could under very difficult circumstances." "I know you did," I said. "I want to talk about what handling everything actually looked like." "Renata, you held an estate sale 4 days after he died," I said. "While I was still boarding a plane. You made $9,400 and sent me a Venmo request for my share of the expenses." The kitchen was very quiet. "We thought it would be simplest," my mother said, "to manage it locally. You told me," I said, "that you wanted to take care of me." She looked at me. "You told me," I said, "that there'd be something for me. An early inheritance. $50,000 from the house sale." My father was looking at the table. "You told me," I said, "that Caleb would have understood." I reached into my bag. I found the manila envelope. I took it out. I unfolded the clasp slowly, the same stiff metal brad from Thursday evening, and I pulled out the 2-page typewritten document and laid it flat on the table between us. My mother looked at it. My father looked at it. Neither of them reached for it. "That's a personal property declaration," I said. "Caleb executed it 3 years ago with a notary on Addison Street. It names me as the sole designated recipient of all of his personal property, his tools, his books, his equipment, his savings account." My mother's hand, which had been resting on the table, moved very slightly toward the document and then stopped. "We didn't know about this," she said. "I know you didn't," I said. "Where did you even?" "It was in a box," I said. "On his closet shelf. The one he told me to keep an eye on." My father made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, low and quiet, the kind that comes before words that don't arrive. "The savings account transfer has been flagged by the probate court," I said. "My attorney filed a formal objection Thursday morning. You'll be receiving correspondence from Patricia Hale's office at the Meridian Building." It will outline the next steps. My mother's jaw was tight. The muscles along the side of her face moved in a way I had never seen before, a slight, involuntary working, like she was chewing on something she couldn't swallow. "We were trying to handle things," she said. "We were trying to take care of everything while you were up in Spokane. Someone had to." "Someone had to," I said. "That's the first statement." She looked at me. "You told me Caleb would have understood." "That's the second." My father looked up. "You told me you wanted to take care of me." I picked up the document. I squared the edges against the table. I slid it back into the manila envelope. "That's the third." I stood up. I put the envelope in my bag. I pushed my chair in, not hard, just back to where it belonged, the legs settling quietly against the tile, and I picked up my bag and I walked down the hall toward the front door. My mother said my name. I opened the front door. The April air came in, cool, and carrying the smell of the neighbor's lilac bush, which was just beginning to open. I stepped through. I pulled the door closed behind me, gently, the latch catching with a soft click. I walked to my car. I sat in it for a moment without starting it, my hands in my lap, looking at the lilac bush over the fence. It was a deep purple, the kind that looks almost bruised in certain lights. Caleb had always liked that bush. He used to cut branches of it and put them in a mason jar on his kitchen table when it bloomed. I started the car. I drove. The probate process took 8 months. Patricia Hale was steady and methodical in the way that good attorneys are, not dramatic, not urgent, just thorough. She filed the right documents in the right order with the right court, and the personal property declaration held the weight Caleb had intended for it because he had been careful, as he always was with the things that mattered to him, and because Gail Fossum at the UPS store on Addison Street had notarized it correctly and kept her copy. For 6 months of the probate process, I attended every Thursday appointment at the Meridian Building with my folder of documentation organized by date, the way I organized discovery files at Drummond and Fitch, chronological, tabbed, referenced. Patricia said once, in the measured way she said most things, that she had rarely worked with a client who came as prepared. I told her I'd had a year to practice. She nodded once, which was the closest she came to expressing approval. For 2 months of correspondence with Dunfield Federal, I submitted the formal account statements, the notarized declaration, and the probate court's objection filing one by one, in the sequence Patricia's office specified. I drove each packet to the Meridian Building in person rather than mailing it because I had learned in 8 years of paralegal work that things that matter do not get lost when you hand them to someone and watch them sign the receipt. The savings account was returned to the estate and then distributed to me. The $9,400 from the estate sale was a more complicated matter. Personal property that had already been sold was difficult to recover in kind, but Patricia established through the documentation I had spent a year building that my parents had liquidated property to which I had a documented prior claim, and the estate settled the difference. Not everything. The law is not a machine for perfect justice. But enough. My parents did not fight it in the end. I think my mother had understood the moment I laid that document on the table that the thing she had believed, that she could manage this the way she had always managed things, quietly, locally, with reasonable authority, was no longer available to her. That the capable one, the fine one, the one who didn't need, had spent a year becoming someone who was very specifically prepared for this exact conversation. She called me in September after the estate closed. "I want you to know," she said, "that we never meant to hurt you." "I know that," I said. "We thought we were doing what was practical." "I know that too," I said. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear the television in the background, my father's game, turned low. "Caleb would have wanted us to be okay," she said. "Caleb wanted me to do right," I said. "So I did." She didn't say anything after that. I let the silence be what it was. After a while she said, "Do you think you'll come for Christmas?" I looked at the wall above my kitchen table, where I had taped a photograph of Caleb that my aunt had sent me. The two of us at a county fair the summer I was 22, both of us squinting into the sun. He had his arm around my shoulders. "I think so," I said. "I haven't decided." "We'd like to see you," she said, in a voice that was smaller than the one she usually used. Not the managing voice. Something else underneath it.
I'll let you know, I said.
We said goodbye, and I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen for a moment, and then I filled Caleb's chipped mug with coffee and held it with both hands while it cooled. The relationship with my parents is different now. Not severed. I am not built for severance, and neither, I think, is this situation. But different. The architecture has changed. They know that I understand exactly how things work, and that I will not be managed by warmth or reasonableness or the assumption that I don't need. My mother still calls on Sundays. We talk about ordinary things. Sometimes she says his name. Those are the best calls. I kept the green flannel shirt. I wear it on cold mornings when I'm working at my kitchen table. The burn mark on the left cuff turned up where I can see it. I kept the chipped mug. I kept the yellow legal paper, all 4 pages, both sides, in the manila envelope with the declaration, in the closet in my hallway. I kept the cardboard box. I don't know exactly why I kept the box. It's empty now. But it sat on Caleb's shelf for 3 years while he waited to see if anything would happen, and it crossed 3 counties in the back of a stranger's truck and sat in a woman's garage in Harker Township and came back to me for $8 on a Saturday morning, and I can't bring myself to put it in the recycling. Some things earn their place in your life by surviving things they had no business surviving. I keep it on the shelf in my hallway. Every morning I walk past it. I don't stop. I just know it's there. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. The people who love you can also be the people who diminish you. That's not a contradiction. That's just how families work sometimes, with a kind of casual authority, a settled assumption about who needs and who provides and who is fine, and an almost complete inability to imagine that the fine one has been building something in the quiet all along. I was the capable one.
They were right about that.
They just didn't understand what it meant.
That's my story.
A cardboard box on a closet shelf in a rental house on Mercer Line Road. A manila envelope on a kitchen table in Dunfield, laid flat between 3 cups of coffee nobody was drinking. A door pulled closed behind me, gently, the latch catching soft, the April air smelling of lilac from the neighbor's fence.
Take this as your sign.
If someone has dismissed your grief, managed your inheritance, or decided on your behalf what you need and don't need, you are allowed to become prepared. You are allowed to do right. You are allowed to lay the papers flat and let the room be quiet and walk out without slamming the door. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been the capable one, the fine one, the one everyone assumed didn't need? I want to know your story. Hit subscribe if you're new here. We talk about the quiet things, the years of building, the moments that don't announce themselves until you're ready. I'll see you in the next one.